right, well, welcome everyone. We're just going to give it a minute so everyone can join and get connected audio-wise. But we're really happy to have you here today on this Thursday evening. And we'll keep on going. We got a couple people. We'll probably get started right around 8:01 just to give people time to filter in. But we are recording this evening. So since you are here tonight, and if you did register, even if you have to hop off, we will be sending out this recording to everyone who registered this evening. So you'll be able to take a look at the conversation afterwards. So let me start sharing my screen. Okay. All right. Awesome. Okay. All right. Well, we are going to get started. I think, is it loading? There we go. Okay, awesome. Well, thank you again for joining us for our Holding Monopoly Utilities Accountable presentation and conversation with our awesome staff and also our friendly partner colleagues here this evening. I'm Annie Wolf. I am the Director of Membership and Community Outreach here at SUN. So my team runs a lot of the events here, but we have some people who will be talking who are not me. So I'm just doing the intro and I'll hand it off to Glen in a second. So just a couple of logistics. We are all old hats at Zoom at this point, but just to remind you all, we do welcome questions this evening. It is a webinar format, so you can't unmute yourself, but please put your questions in the Q&A and our team will be answering them both live. And then we have a couple of other SUN staffers online to be answering them in the Q&A. But also feel free to use the chat, drop in where you're calling in from, what you're interested in, and use that to chat with one another. But again, if you have a question you want one of the panelists to answer, please use that Q&A. And you'll find both of those buttons there at the bottom of your screen, chat and Q&A. And if you want to make sure that everybody sees what you're commenting on in the chat, you want to make sure that says everyone. And like I did mention, you will get a link to view the recording of this session afterwards. We'll send that out tomorrow, as well as all the links that we share. So this evening, we'll do a brief introduction. We'll talk a little bit more about this petition that we are here to discuss today, and give some specific examples of monopoly utilities out there. What we actually hope the FTC will do as a result of this petition and actions that you can take to help us move this forward. And with that, I will pass it over to Glen.
Thank you, Annie, very much. I want to welcome everybody. My name is Glen Brand. I'm the Vice President of Policy and Advocacy for Solar United Neighbors. I just want to welcome everybody. This is a topic that's really critically important. And the occasion for this event is the release, as Annie said, of a letter by Solar United Neighbors, Center for Biological Diversity, the Institute for Local Self-Reliance, and the Energy and Policy Institute. And we're really glad to have two experts here to talk about, from those organizations, to talk about our petition, which is really a glorified letter, but it's a petition to the Federal Trade Commission to try to hold the monopoly utilities more accountable. And I just want to say just a word or two about politically powerful monopoly utilities. So they play obviously a key role, both positive and negative, in shaping and executing state and local energy policies. They also impact some federal energy policies. Unfortunately, as we're all too aware, many utilities are trying to suppress the use of distributed solar, that is rooftop solar and community solar. And they do this in a number of ways. And one of the ways they do this we'll be talking about today. So this goes beyond the issue of rooftop solar, but it certainly is a critically important issue for Solar United Neighbors and all of you who are solar supporters and solar owners. So with that, I'm not going to talk about it because you're all interested in hearing about our petition, which was released yesterday, and it's attracting some really positive media attention, which we're very glad. As I said, I will be talking to you at the end of this and sort of urging you to take action, because it's one thing to hear about all this bad news about utilities, and the key thing for me personally is that we take action, and we think we really have something important that could happen. So with that, I'd like to introduce both of our speakers. together. The first speaker is going to be Jean Sue, who's the director of the Energy Justice Program and a senior attorney at the Center for Biological Diversity. Her recent work focuses on utility accountability, of course, widespread utility shutoffs, particularly during the pandemic, and the use of the president's executive powers to transition the country off of fossil fuels. Jean chairs the board of the Climate Action Network International, and she serves on the Lawrence Berkeley National Labs Advisory Board on future electricity utility regulation. Our second speaker after Jean will be Matt Casper. He's the Deputy Director of the Energy and Policy Institute. This is a very important watchdog organization, a close partner with us, that exposes attacks on renewable energy and counters misinformation by fossil fuel and utility interests. Before joining the Energy and Policy Institute, Matt was a research assistant for the Energy and Policy team at the Center for American Progress, where he focused on state and local issues. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jean.
Okay, hi everyone. This is my first time to be on a Solar United Neighbors call, so I'm super honored. I'm a dutiful member of Sun and got my own rooftop solar through the Sun Co-op. So I love Sun and really honored to be here with so many incredible activists and fellow rooftop solar owners and fighters, and of course the incredible Matt Kasper and the incredible Glen and all the Sun team. So I will kick us off by just giving a little bit of background about why we're doing this and why now and what it is. So I don't think it's a surprise to anybody here that we're in a crisis of many sorts right now in this country. I do want to take a moment to recognize the incredible violence that occurred over this weekend with multiple shootings and the devastation of racially motivated acts across the country in both California and Buffalo. So just wanted to raise that. But it is that time where we are seeing a rise in racial violence, and at the same time, we are seeing it collide with climate disasters, democracy, the crumbling of our democracy, and a real threat to our public health in the form of rising energy prices, especially with global volatility from the Ukraine-Russia war. So all of this is coming to a real breaking point, and a lot of it at its roots falls with our very majority fossil fuel utility system. Everybody here knows that our utility system helps fund and fuel a lot of those crises that I just spoke of. So in terms of consumers, we have rising crushing rates that disproportionately impact communities of color. In terms of climate, these are the utilities that are pumping out and keep continuing to build fossil fuel plants, which are causing the climate emergency and eventually pummeling down on us and communities who are particularly disadvantaged here. And then on democracy, we have a system that Matt will go deeply into, where utilities play a huge role in how our democracy is functioning or dysfunctioning in many aspects because of the way they are interfering in elections as well as legislative processes. All of this is coming to a point where we're looking for significant utility reform. It is time to actually look at this system that literally was built a century ago. Is it still working for us? Is it still serving the public interest that it originally was created for and allowed for the monopolies that they have that remain today? And for all the reasons that I just spoke about, I would argue no, that this utility system is not working for the public interest. In fact, we just found that over the course of COVID alone, multi-billion dollar companies, these utility companies, shut off households over 3.5 million times across this country. That's not okay. That corporations are essentially in control of the human right to electricity right now. So given all of that, a bunch of us and a bunch of you came together to ask the Federal Trade Commission in particular to open up an investigation of utilities right now. The Federal Trade Commission is a federal agency, and it possesses a particularly interesting power to open up investigations of companies that are both harming competitors as well as ultimately consumers. So those are kind of two things that we'll be talking about tonight: harm to competitors as well as harm to consumers and consumer protection. The FTC is actually guided by statutes that are there to help protect both of those types of players in our society. And if you think about it through that lens, utilities are a fantastic kind of model target that are both harming competitors, including rooftop solar owners, like a lot of folks here, as well as consumers at the end of the day. So the FTC petition is based on this idea that the Federal Trade Commission has a broad power to investigate particular industries that they find may be violating laws that they're in charge of enforcing. And one of those investigatory powers is called Article 6B of the Ftc Act. And it allows for the company, or allows for the FTC to really ask companies that they're inspecting, essentially, to give information that otherwise is confidential. So in a way, it is a subpoena power. And our friends at Energy and Policy Institute do a ton of incredible work getting public FOIA requests, Freedom of Information Act requests, but there's just some stuff that we just can't see. And so subpoena powers in this way from the Federal Trade Commission are extremely powerful because they allow for this agency, this investigatory agency, to call information from companies that is otherwise confidential. And so within that, we hope that such type of investigation would actually allow the FTC to gather a very large amount of data about the types of abuses that we're seeing both towards consumers and competitors right now by electric utility companies. One of the important things about this type of investigation is that it is not unprecedented. So if we actually look about 80 years ago, in the 1920s and 30s, the electric utility industry was facing similar straits in terms of a huge amount of concentration of power in just 10 companies. At that point, only 10 utility companies across the country held control of 75% of the electricity that was being delivered. That led to an incredible amount of corruption. It led to an incredible amount of consumer harm. And it also allowed for this really relentless campaign at that time that private utilities were waging against public power companies or public power providers. Things like if Tennessee Valley Authority today, or other public municipal government-owned utilities that we have only kind of scraps of today around the country. At that point, the FTC realized and understood what a really credible threat this type of concentration of monopoly power was having on consumers and the public. So it decided to open up an investigation, an Article 6B investigation, which is exactly what we're asking for. And it spent 7 years dissecting and diagnosing the abuses and the corruption of utilities. And after those 7 years, it issued hundreds of pages of an investigation that categorized the types of abuse that these utilities were carrying out, as well as a really incredible set of recommendations about how we were going to rein in this monopoly power of utilities and try to fix the utility system. And that eventually led to legislation, and what eventually passed is something called PUCA, the Public Utility Holdings Commissions Act, which basically broke down and far better regulated those holding companies that electric utilities were in the form of back then. Unfortunately, in 2005, during a grave period of huge federal deregulation, that statute was repealed. And what we've seen since 2005 till today is, again, a massive rise of electric utility monopolization, an increasing amount of mergers across the electric utility industry, increasing regulatory capture of commissions, and basically with the rise of renewable energy, a very blatant attack on rooftop and community solar and other sources of renewable energy that essentially bite away at the revenue streams of utilities. So in essence, that's a lot to kind of digest. But this petition is here. It's a community effort. We've had over 235 organizations sign on to this letter, and it spans most of the states in this country, asking the Federal Trade Commission to up that type of investigation, that it's time 80 years later to do it again. And essentially, let's put a huge spotlight on the utility industry and figure out what's wrong and how we can possibly solve that. And so with that, I'm actually going to turn it over to Matt, who is going to give us some flavor of the types of abuses that we're seeing that could be susceptible to FTC investigation and enforcement.
Great, thanks, Jean, and thanks, Glenn, and the folks at Sun, and all of you for spending part of your night with us. So the petition to the FTC is organized into two categories, as Jean talked about, of electric utility abuses. The first is what we describe as unfair competitive actions that harm clean energy competitors. And the second is under what we've called unfair and deceptive acts, including the corrupt dealings and the voting interference that enrich utilities and ultimately drive up consumer electricity rates and decrease consumer choice. So I'll first describe a few examples in that first category. What are utilities doing to prevent competition in emerging technologies, such as customers generating their own clean renewable electricity, and how are utilities doing it? So for a number of years in Michigan, there have been different groups and customers working to eliminate a 1% cap that limits the distributed energy in the territories of utility companies. The two big ones in Michigan are DTE Energy and Consumers Energy, two of the largest power companies. And last year, even the chair of the Public Service Commission, the regulator of these utility companies, said there is no engineering need for a system-wide cap. In other words, this cap isn't in place to protect the electric grid. It's in place because of the utilities wanting to prevent competition. And so while organizations have been working to get rid of this cap, a front group that has received over $40 million from Consumers Energy over the years ran misleading advertisements last year, a campaign that in which they were telling the public that out-of-state special interests, the solar companies that aren't based in Michigan, caused the blackouts that happen on the Texas electric grid in the winter. This is, of course, false. The utilities in Texas have all said it was gas shortages that affected their ability to operate their power plants, but that's what the advertisements were telling the people. And the advertisements also went so far as to say, without evidence or explanation, that lifting the cap on distributed generation would harm the state's clean energy goal progress. So I'll just take a moment to explain a little bit more why this specific example, I think, is very relevant to the FTC. So the Public Service Commission, the regulators of Consumers Energy, approved a rate case several years ago in which Consumers Energy agreed not to do this dark money spending. But months later, the utility company told legislators, well, that settlement only involves a regulated utility. It doesn't pertain to the holding company, CMS Energy. And we see this time and time again in rate cases where interveners, consumer advocates or staff of attorney generals or regulators themselves want to understand how utilities spend money. And the utility says, well, it's not ratepayer dollars, so we're not going to tell you. Essentially saying you don't have the power to open up the books for that part of the corporation. You can only see, the books of the subsidiary that you regulate. So it's a major reason why we're urging the FTC to ask questions and direct those to the parent corporations of these holding companies, these utility companies. So back to Michigan, the legislation is not advanced to eliminate the cap. And knowing this, DTE Energy, the other utility company, which also utilizes front groups under its political advocacy umbrella, recently filed a rate case. And they basically included an ultimatum saying, well, we'll raise the cap to 3% in our territory, but only in return if we get to place mandatory fees just on the solar customers and reduce the credits that they receive for having that excess electricity go back to the grid. So that rate case is still open. The PSC has not ruled on it, but very clear actions by the utilities there and the groups it has connections to keep the rooftop solar market from growing. And this is just one example. Our petition highlights Florida. We know the largest utility there, Florida Power and Light, wrote the bill this session that passed both chambers that would have harmed the ability for distributed solar companies to compete in that state. Now, the governor, I think, as probably we all know, just recently vetoed that bill as a result of major public outcry and not really, the governor saying not wanting to add a financial crunch on Floridians facing inflation like we all are. In Minnesota, we usually like to think of the big utility there, Xcel, as being really forward-looking. You know, they were the first major U.S. utility to pledge to go carbon-free by 2050. But folks, you know, in Minnesota and other parts of Xcel Energy's service territory will know just the many ways that that utility has restricted competition. So our petition highlights how the company was fined $1 million by state regulators for its actions of creating long and costly interconnection problems for solar projects, specifically community solar gardens. The fine, though, was only pertaining to the actions of 2019. And folks on the ground will tell us that the problem continues today. In fact, a report from just a few months ago detailed how Xcel told a rooftop solar customer that they're going to have to wait, a potential customer, that they're going to have to wait 15 years for Xcel to review the application and connect it to the distribution grid. So for some context here, Xcel reported $1.6 billion in profits last year on $13.4 billion in revenue, $1 million fine, $1.6 billion in profits. There's one more example I just want to highlight in this category, and it deals with transmission lines. You know, we all know that in order to have a decarbonized electricity grid, we're going to need to build out transmission lines in order to bring renewable energy to where it is needed most, to complement the growth of distributed energy and demand response and energy efficiency programs. The petition highlights Professor Ari Pesco, who directs the Electricity Law Initiative at Harvard Law School, and his recently published paper on how utility companies have evaded competition when it comes to transmission development. And in doing so, all of us have suffered because it has prevented us from accessing the cost reductions on our power bills if there was an actual competitive transmission development process in our country. And one egregious example that has happened when it comes to transmission planning occurred a few years ago when Entergy, a big utility company operating in Louisiana, Arkansas, Texas, and Mississippi, placed a consultant in the transmission planning process that oversees that region of the country to block transmission projects that were going to bring renewable energy from the upper Midwest and the Plains states south into Entergy's service territory. And by working to block that renewable energy from reaching customers in its service territory, you know, Entergy can continue to operate its expensive fossil fuel power plants. And then they can also make the case to their state regulators, we need to build even more fossil gas plants. So it's a clear example of a utility preventing competition. Now, the second part of our petition highlights the actions that utilities take to enrich themselves and ultimately harm consumers with higher bills. And first, I'll say, last week tonight with John Oliver devoted much of the show on Sunday to covering utility scandals. I will say, though, as a warning, it's an HBO show, so it does have some adult language, but it is funny, and it briefly highlights the first energy scandal in Ohio, which we also detail in our petition. So just as a refresher, First Energy admitted as part of a deferred prosecution agreement with the US Department of Justice that it did indeed pay more than $59 million to a dark money group called Generation Now, which was involved in a racketeering conspiracy that involved bribe payments in exchange for a $1 billion ratepayer funded bailout of the nuclear and coal power plants in that state. Well, actually also coal units in Indiana as well. So then Ohio Speaker of the House, Larry Householder, has been since indicted for that alleged use of the first energy money to get certain people elected so that he could rise to the speaker position and then in turn get the bailout bill passed. Now, as this scandal has played out over the past few years, we're really understanding that it's not just limited to First Energy's Ohio subsidiary. The customers of other First Energy subsidiaries have likely been paid for those that $60 million pot of money because of the way that utility holding companies operate and have money passed through the various subsidiaries under its umbrella, especially when it comes to the government affairs activities. So it's not fully clear in large part because the state regulator of one state doesn't have the ability to go and see the receipts of the subsidiary under that utility holding company that's operated in another state. So it's another reason why we need this FTC investigation that not just targets First Energy, but many in the industry who have parent companies that aren't overseen by utility regulators or have these many subsidiaries in other states passing money back and forth that is just making it almost impossible for a state regulator just to keep track of. So in my remaining minutes, I want to highlight that the petition details in more detail how utilities use front groups as part of the efforts to get policies enacted, including a case where Entergy again used subcontractors and those folks paid actors to support in front of regulators the utility's plan to build a gas-fired power plant. Now, an independent investigation found that the Entergy New Orleans subsidiary, that CEO, was even sending text messages to the contractors asking how many people the contractor could recruit for that upcoming meeting in front of the decision makers. Lastly, I'll say that the petition highlights how utilities mobilize the recipients of charitable contributions to influence the political process. We've seen churches, nonprofits, charities, organizations that represent people of color advocate for policies that enrich utilities, while at the same time they're receiving money from the Utility Corporations Foundation. And in some cases, these foundations are also managed by the utility lobbyists. So it's definitely an area that we strongly encourage the FTC to examine. This agency has recently looked at how tobacco companies pay for partnerships to improve their brand and the nature of those payments. So you can definitely see the parallels to the utility industry. I can hand it over back to you, Glenn.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks, Gene. Matt, could you say a couple of words about, I think something that's less understood about this kind of level of corruption or of undue influence, and that's the role that monopoly utilities play in electoral politics. And it's I find when I talk to people about this, they are shocked if they don't hear about it, but the idea that they are political players to the degree that they are is really quite eye-opening. So, Matt, I was hoping that you would just say a few words, maybe a couple examples about this. I know it takes a couple of different forms.
Yeah, well, sure. As somebody here in Chicago, we're seeing this play out with the ComEd scandal. The ability of for almost the past decade, even further, of what Exelon and its subsidiary ComEd were doing through the political process here to get bills passed, make those deals with the then Illinois Speaker of the House, Mike Madigan, arranged specific roles in the company to benefit the folks that Mike Madigan wanted benefited. So that's a very egregious example, but it plays out when it comes to the utility corporation contributing money to 501c4 organizations that don't have to disclose that money, and those 501c4s can influence specific races. It's not just federal races, folks. We see it at very local levels. Because when it comes to really like state energy policy, it's all happening at the state or local level. So a lot of utility money is focused on those races. And then, of course, the political action committees themselves. They're huge forces, these companies are also some of the largest employers in the state too. And that themselves creates a lot of political power, a lot of sway that they have over state leaders.
Yeah, I think that, yeah, and there are many, many more examples, and several of which are cited in the petition. I think the key thing here for everyone to understand is that utilities are regulated by both the public utility commissions, or whatever they're called in your state, and also by the legislature. And so if they're helping to elect the candidates they want to serve in the legislature, then you can see that they have putting their thumb on the scale, as to put it mildly. Then, of course, there are those states where public utility commissioners are not just appointed, but are elected. And so we've seen this kind of problem in Arizona and Georgia and other places where you have that set up. So it is, I find this part of this particularly troubling, that ratepayer dollars, customer dollars are being spent on political campaigns. So that's among the many things that give me heartburn. That's one. Okay, so this is the kind of stuff that makes us angry, and for good reason. And so we've documented in this petition. I think we need to turn to what we hope to accomplish, what we want the FTC to do. And I saw that some people have little faith in the federal government to take action, and I can't fault you for that motion at all. But I want to turn back to Jean to talk about the practical outcomes here. What could we hope to see? How it might turn out?
Yeah, so there are, I think I'll back up with one thing that I'd love to say about the democracy issues a bit. And the chat is so rich. I'm loving the chat. This is great. One of the most kind of beautiful pieces of existing legislation that we do have on the books are our antitrust laws. And one of the reasons behind why antitrust laws were actually passed to begin with, in response to the huge amount of monopoly power that was happening early in the 1900s, was this grave sense that we needed to actually protect our democracy. Legislators at that point realized that our democracy was under threat if corporations had too much power and would overpower the voice of everyday citizens. The entire thrust of antitrust law is to actually break corporate power in order to protect our democracy. So that is like a really key big thing. Everybody kind of glazes over when they see antitrust, or they think right now of Facebook, et cetera. But really, like, the thrust of those laws is about protecting our public and the democracy. One of the best decisions that the Biden administration has made is putting Lina Khan as the commissioner head of the Federal Trade Commission. For those who don't know Professor Khan, she is one of the leading lights in bringing back this exact ethos of antitrust to the country right now. She is at the head of the helm of investigating tech companies and their abject and overdue and overwrought power on democracy, and how they harm the public interest. And one of the reasons why we actually are eager to bring this FTC petition to her and lay out all these facts in front of a democratically controlled commission now is precisely for these reasons of explaining how the utility system is essentially threatening our democracy exactly in the ways that Matt was just talking about, and that all of us here are so upset about. So with that kind of lens on FTC's power and the people who are in power right now as commissioners, the FTC petition is seeking a couple of different outcomes. So the first is, if these items actually are documented and kind of put forward in a categorized way, we hope that this will actually spur federal agencies to prosecute and enforce antitrust laws and consumer protection laws on utilities. So we do have laws on the books that are here to protect consumers and that are here to break monopoly power. Let's get those enforced. And so this is really like a plea and a call for this agency, as well as the Department of Justice and other federal agencies, to spotlight this. They have a lot of things to deal with. So this is like, let's concentrate you and focus you on this really bad acting industry that has a huge amount of power over the future of our climate and the planet, essentially. Let's get you to focus and actually bring on this action. So that's the first kind of big part of our ask. It's please enforce the existing laws, because they are there, and we know that there is political will in some of the agencies to do this. So that's one. The second is to actually have a set of recommendations come out of this investigation, very similar to what happened in the 1930s with the PUCA law, where the FTC is in a position to actually make recommendations about what an alternative system could look like, a system that is truly accountable, a system that does not jerry-rig our democracy or our elections, a system that is fair to consumers and protects them, and a system that ultimately has our climate in their best interest, so that renewable energy is no longer stifled and outcompeted against. So these are the types of issues that we'd be bringing up in terms of alternative models, energy democracy models where renewable energy and rooftop solar can be brought in with special benefits and economic benefits to communities of color and our most vulnerable communities here in the States. So that is kind of a second perceived outcome that we would hope the FTC would take on. And again, this is not something new. They did it 80 years ago. And so we are asking for that same type of analysis and recommendation.
Thank you, Jean. That's really clarifying. So before we go to the Q&A, I'm going to say this a couple of times, but I want to say it now, is we need the FTC to take up this investigation, right? This is something they can choose to do or not to do. So it's very important to contact the FTC and to tell them that this is important to you, this is important to your business, your family, your community. And we've set up an, of course you could do this directly, but we've set up an easier way to do it. And we have an action alert that's all set up. I encourage people to customize, how you can type in the message, or you can just send it as is. I really encourage people to customize to the extent they have the time, and say something about this that connects to you and your community, maybe the issues with your utility. That's going to be a more impactful. Any message to them is going to be impactful. They don't get a whole lot of these kind of messages, frankly, so that's helpful. But if you could spend a minute or two customizing a sentence out of that, it would really be helpful. So we'll be sending out the link to that action alert. It's in the chat, but after this, at the very end, we'll highlight that link, and also at the everyone who attended the webinar or registered for the webinar will get an email follow-up, and you'll have that link to make it easy for you to do it. All right, so let's go to questions. We have some really fascinating questions and some challenging ones. And so in no particular order, I think Charlie Behrens had a very perceptive question. Is how would, I don't think it's cynical, I think it's a very genuine question. How will we be able to avoid the FTC commissioners being corrupted by the utilities, just like the state oversight commissions? Very good question. Who wants to take that one, Jean?
Actually, anybody here could take that. Glenn, do you want to take it first, or Liz, or Emma, or Matt?
I'll just say that the FTC, the commissioners, they're they're appointed to 7-year terms, and
Yeah.
so this is a role in which, when we see other state or federal regulator, positions, maybe thinking of the political atmosphere when they make decisions or open up investigations. 7-year term, some of these folks aren't going to be, their term doesn't end until 2025. So 2020, I think 2029. So we think there's a long runway, and we just hope that the investigation that they open, maybe could be influenced in some way, but I would say that what we have seen from the FTC is they've opened up other orders at other industries and have released, I think, maybe, at least in my opinion, really good data and showing what they have gotten back from the company. So I am encouraged of what the FTC has done of late.
I will say the three, so it's a 5-member commission, and we have 3 Democrats right now and 2 Republicans. I will say, out of all the federal agency commissions that we have right now, the FTC is pretty incredibly stacked in a good way on the Democrat side. As I said before, Lena Khan is the chair, and she is a professor and with a sterling record of being a professor and not tied to corporations and being a bull against the tech companies. And so I think her leadership is particularly incredible at this moment. We also have a very new commissioner who just came on, Commissioner Bedoya, who is also who comes from an academic background, but also a huge advocate background for fair access and fair price broadband in particular. And so he is looking at this through a broadband monopoly lens and has done a ton of incredible work trying to challenge those monopolies and make sure that access to broadband is getting to communities all across the country. So he also has a really incredible record of working for the public interest. And our third commissioner is Commissioner Slaughter, and she was Chuck Schumer's right-hand woman for a very long time on kind of legal matters. You can have your different opinions of Chuck Schumer's. I'll leave it there.
One thing I might add here is that I have been reading that, and I think it reflects some of what Gene was saying about who's on the commission. But the Biden administration has expressed vocal interest in antitrust, and some of the leaders in Congress have a renewed interest. Senator Klobuchar just wrote a book about that issue for one example. So, I would say that we are cautiously optimistic, right? We're pragmatic here. And I also think that this is not a partisan issue. That while everything gets messed up in our extreme partisanship nowadays, I actually think there are many conservatives and liberals who agree that monopolies are problems, and thus the interest in tackling big tech and so forth. So I think there is an interest and a stomach for taking this up. But of course, that's not going to happen unless the public demands it. So you can imagine I'm going to say, please contact them and explain that you're paying attention and this is a concern of yours. Okay, so many interesting questions. This one here by Judith Anderson. Judith asked, to what extent are you reaching out to city and county governments to sign on to the petition and other efforts to hold utilities accountable for abuses? So this is city and government, the city and county governments. It's a very intriguing question. And, we haven't really thought about it. I haven't really thought about that too much. I think Gene mentioned that more than 230, I can't remember the exact number, organizations signed on to the petition that our 4 organizations initiated. But it's a very good and intriguing idea that to ask mayors and county executives to join on. I don't have anything more to say about that, but it's a great idea. And I don't know, Gene or Matt, have you all thought about this at all, this piece of it?
I think in fights like this, where we are, really waging an incredible public campaign towards a commission that should be, that should have appetite for this. I think we do need to think about all the different constituencies. That is a fantastic idea, and now hopefully you've planted a new seed to grow of a new public effort to get our local electeds, who have been absolutely incredible. From day one, especially when the Trump administration started, of having grassroots up reactions to what's happening on a federal level. That still exists under the Biden administration, and we need to mobilize those folks. So thank you so much for that awesome idea.
Yes, and then on a related note, here's another very perceptive question. Saying, I understand this is a state-by-state issue, but have we noticed a notable difference between utility cooperatives, that is rural electric cooperatives, versus standard utilities? By that, I think is meant monopoly utilities. That is corporate ones. It says, I am in Texas, and the utility co-ops don't let customers choose their retail electric provider. Be curious to hear if there are big differences from an investigative perspective.
That's a Matt question.
I'll say that I don't know if the FTC. I don't know if their authority. I imagine they do have the authority to submit, ask the questions to electric cooperatives and the folks running those entities. But to your question of, do we see kind of like a difference when it comes to like the scandalous behavior or subverting democracy or something? There's not. I have not seen one specific subsect of the electric utility industry behaving more appropriately than another. Oftentimes, electric cooperatives have old and dated coal plants on the grid, and so they're in some ways fighting renewable energy to keep those plants online even longer. But the argument for the cooperative model is there is supposed to be that direct ability to change behavior, because they're not listening. There's not that financial fiduciary obligation to shareholders. They have to serve the customer. So that is one benefit there.
Yes, this is an interesting question. How likely is an initiative such as this would survive a change of administrations and a new FTC chairperson? So that's a good question, because we're used to seeing many administrative kinds of decisions being flipped by subsequent administrations. So, Gene, what about the stability of decisions by the FTC across administrations? That's a good question.
Yeah, so these appointments actually were just made, and as Matt said, they are 7-year appointments. So we expect, if the administrations, respect the rule of law, we expect those commissioners to actually stay accordingly on the 7-year plan. So that's so that's kind of one way to view this. Obviously, there are always kind of risks in terms of executive powers and executive actions, and when administrations change, what happens to those executive powers and actions. Something like this is quite interesting because it is an investigation that we're asking for, or potential enforcement actions. We did see under the Trump administration that certain projects that were being taken underway were severely stalled or stopped. So those are always, potential pitfalls and threats to these types of issues. But I think, as Glenn was saying before, surprisingly, the utility issue in antitrust generally actually has pretty broad bipartisan support. Lena Khan was actually voted in by both sides of the aisle. One of the more unifying efforts of this Congress. So I don't particularly see a huge backlash if something like this goes underway on utilities.
Got it. This question takes us in a very related, different direction. Of course, we're talking about federal action here to investigate these abuses that are supposedly regulated by the states. So that's the relationship. So this question is interesting. It says, in addition to the FTC petition, which is great, thank you, do you have advice or guidance on ways for people to engage with their state PUCs, that is Public Utility Commissions, on these kinds of issues? So that is, of course, where the rubber meets the road nowadays. And yes, there are lots of ways to do that. There are many organizations. Solar United Neighbors is one of the many organizations that engages on the state level and the administrative level, the regulatory bodies like the Public Service Commissions and Public Utility Commissions, whose job it is, of course, is to regulate utilities and prevent the kind of abuses that are documented in the petition. Unfortunately, these are usually appointed positions, and so it's very hard to hold them, even more difficult to hold them accountable by electoral activity. So it is much more indirect. There basically nobody knows who their public utility commissioners are, right? Unless you're very involved in this stuff, you don't know who they are. They're rather faceless bureaucrats. They have an extraordinarily important job, and it's really important for citizens to demand that the public utility commissions do their job. Now, they are also open to public comment, and so they open up documents, dockets, that is, where they take up these questions. It's important that the public participate. It's not easy, but it's a lot easier now that you can do this electronically and online. And so, how are you going to track this? Well, you really need to probably connect with an organization like Sun, and like other state-based groups that track this stuff, and then contact them. They don't hear from a lot of people. When they hear from 20 ordinary citizens in a state, that's a shocking amount to them. That'll get their attention. I think people need to understand that, because I think they make sense that, oh, they get hundreds of emails. That's not true. Public utility commissions do not. Very rarely do they get more than a cluster from ordinary people. They hear it from lobbyists and utilities and lawyers and so forth, but not from the public. And that really does grab their attention. So that's what I would say about this. When things open up, as they are after the pandemic, there are opportunities to attend and testify, but those have largely been shut off for us for a while. But electronic comment continues to be important. And I really appreciate that question.
Glenn, can I? Go ahead, Jean.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, with when it comes to the state public service commissions, these are agencies in our state government that I think we often find are understaffed and overworked. And I would say, I really believe a majority of these regulators, I know John Oliver calls a few of them out, but I really would and believe a majority of them want to hold and protect the market and protect customers. It's just the utilities have done an amazing and a significant job of subverting their regulatory powers, and especially in light of the pandemic, where more dockets are opened to examine utility issues. There's just so much on the plate of regulators and their staff right now. So yeah, it's a great, back to the earlier point of getting more folks, state level folks involved in this request of the FTC.
Yeah, and I think I'd add that, the systems are not designed right now to allow for public participation. It is a black box, and in some states it is intentionally that way. I think if you look at other commissions, state agencies, you'll see something similar. These state agencies, were produced to manage and regulate a particular industry, and the state often views itself as the fox, I guess, like guarding what's going on. But in a lot of ways, it is a black box procedure that the public has been X'd out of. So really, a huge part of our democracy and saving it right now is actually getting involved and going into that deep black box and breaking light into it. We need to break it open. And the first way to do that is getting active with your PUC proceedings. It is going to be extremely technical sounding and painful in a lot of ways to intervene. It's purposefully so, and I would say persist and get in touch with these organizations like SUN and other state orgs that are there to actually be there for you to guide the way. I see Sally Robertson is also on with NC Warren. If you're in North Carolina, contact Sally. These are the types of orgs that are trying to break this open and have been trying so for decades. So let's keep going and get it right.
I think we have time for one more question. This is a very relevant question from Bill Fowles. Sorry if I messed up your name, Bill. Would it be helpful for private sector companies withstanding, that is, i.e. financial damages from IOU, meaning investor-owned utilities, anti-competitive actions, to file parallel complaints at the FTC to help stir the waters? So private companies that have suffered from anti-competitive behavior by monopoly utilities, what should they do?
Absolutely. They are also a part of this puzzle. Again, the FTC is here to protect both consumers as well as competitors. And that includes solar developers, it includes rooftop solar owners. It really is anybody who is quote unquote competing against IOUs for their generation and revenue. So they are the types of people that the laws are here to protect as well. We do have a couple of rooftop solar companies on that petition who signed it. But again, this is like the other wonderful idea about getting local state electeds, igniting the industry so that they are aware and can wage their own petition at the same time and support this is great. And that is something that I think some folks are interested in doing. And so if you are one of those people here, please get in touch with us and let's make it happen.
That's great. That's a really practical question. Thank you. So we're coming up at the end of the hour, and I just wanted to first of all thank Matt and Jean very much for presenting. It's really helpful. It's really quite exciting to be on the cusp of something, taking action on this. And then of course, I want to thank all of you for taking time. I know it's no small matter to take an hour out of your evening to do this. I really appreciate you being engaged to attend this. A couple of things that you can expect from us will be an email, follow-up email for everyone who's on this webinar that'll have these links that you're looking at now. So there's the letter to the FTC if you want to read it. It's it's about 20 pages, and a lot of it are notes, but it's actually surprisingly easy to read, and you can scan it for utilities mentioned near you. But I think the most important thing, if I was going to ask you to do one thing, of course you know what it is, please sign the petition. There's the link. This will be sent to the FTC commissioners, urging them to take action and begin this investigation. Some people said, can we write them separately in a separate letter? We'll get an address for you if you want to do that. I really appreciate that suggestion. You can also learn more, and these are links, so you can't really click on them on the screen, but we'll send this out. You can learn more about Center for Biological Diversity, Energy and Policy Institute. And lastly, if you haven't seen it, there's a very fun John Oliver piece on the abuses of monopoly utilities, and he goes through it, and he's he's very serious and very silly, and it's kind of watchable for an issue which can be intimidating. Please tell your friends and your coworkers and your family to sign the petition, because we really need to spread the word, and we're going to keep you in the loop too. So when there's developments on this issue, you'll be hearing from us, including ways that you can take further action. So with that, please accept our thanks, and we really look forward to talking to you about this issue and other similar issues in the future.